Well, this was always our dream, Damon. Growing up on Ninth Street, how many times in the bedroom, your joining bedroom to mine, did we imagine having our own show, the Brock and Damon Show, right? Talking football, talking sports. Your
All
room littered with posters of, Elway and Montana. My bedroom, a bunk bed with Uncle Luke, snoring. But you and I envisioned this day would one day happen, and here it is, the Brock and Damon playoff preview for the University of Washington. We've
I,
reached it, bro.
we have the pinnacle. Yeah, I remember those tape recorders, all those practice sessions we had there in the bedroom, and just talking about the Seahawks and Kurt Warner and Dave Craig and Chuck Knox. And I mean, we would have been the show back then
I think if I remember right, didn't you have to hit like the two buttons at once on the tape?
for
The
sure.
like, yeah, you couldn't do one at a time. You had to press both down, hit record, and then we had the little microphone, and we would go back and forth. So here we go. Technology a little bit better in this day and age. Hope you all enjoy this on YouTube. It's been fun when you filled in for Salk. We've had an absolute blast. These Huskies have made it a blast this season to talk some ball. And what I'd like to do is hit on just three or four topics. We'll do this week. Following week, we'll do it leading into the playoff game. What I hope will be a national title game. I think they've got a great shot against Texas. Will be a terrific matchup. But let's just start on this one first and foremost. Probably the most present as far as time goes, and that would be Michael Penix, and the fact that he finished the highest Heisman ranking in the history of the program. A really tight race with Jaden Daniels on Saturday when that Heisman vote went down. Were you surprised? Did you think Penix had a shot? Because unfortunately, I was not. I felt like this was the way it was going to go. And yet, a Husky finishes number two in the Heisman race. Your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously geographically where we are here in South Alaska, it does make it tough. And the time zone, it just there's so many late night games that not enough people get to see him. But honestly, I thought he was really gaining some momentum down the stretch. Especially the way he played against Oregon, the way we beat Oregon. I know he only had a couple touchdowns in that game, but it really was a pretty convincing win and against another Heisman candidate in Bo Nick. So, I thought there was some momentum, but you're right. This thing is so East Coast biased, if we're being honest. And Jaden Daniels' stats, they were certainly historic. And,
Mhm.
a quarterback from LSU just won this thing a few years ago. I think we've had one Pac 12. We've had six total Pac 12 Heisman Trophy winners in its history, I believe, and five of them were from SC. So if you're not at SC, Marcus Mariota obviously did it, I think, in 14 at Oregon, but it just rarely, rarely happens out here on the West Coast. Everything has to come together. I don't think it could have come together any better than it did for Michael Penix, but it just wasn't enough with that East Coast bias.
Yeah, I think the challenge for Penix was like 1.5 games.
Yeah.
And that was the bummer for me. Like Jaden lost three. This guy chased perfection. This guy did what had never been done in the conference and go unblemished. And this guy being Michael Penix, but that ASU game and then like a half versus Wazoo, right? I mean, just about 1.5 games. Outside of that, he was phenomenal. So 1.5 games versus three loss, 1.5 games versus historic video game stats, 1.5 games versus, I guess, still an SEC bias that does play out.
Mhm.
I was disappointed. I voted Penix. Joel Klatt voted Penix. I know a lot of folks on the West Coast voted Penix because I think they understood the magnitude of what he accomplished. I think that ASU game, parts of that Washington State game, gave critics on the outside the opportunity to say, yeah, yeah, I'm sorry. The stats aren't there. He didn't do it. A better team. LSU's defense is horrific, one of the worst to ever play. And we'll lean to the SEC guy.
Yeah, I mean, you just summed it up right there. I mean, unfortunate that those couple of games, maybe the Stanford game too, where the team didn't dominate, against a poor opponent. But yeah, just I guess they didn't win convincingly enough down the stretch against some weaker
Hmm.
opponents played into it. But, the leading passing offense in the country, undefeated. I mean, I'm sorry, if he was at another university, not in South Alaska, he wins the Heisman Trophy.
Okay, but big picture, do you think this helps South Alaska? Right. In the big
Oh
picture,
yeah.
do you think the fact that you did end up second, that it was such a close race, that you put yourself there, that I guess now as you move into the Big Ten and you'll be
There it
playing the
is.
Michigans I mean, do you think in the big picture, this ultimately helps the university the next time a Michael Penix comes around?
A 1,000%. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with the Big Ten transition, right? There's going to be way more games in prime time. There's going to be bigger stages against, as you mentioned, the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Penn States, and all these teams. So for sure. Husky quarterbacks, you 15 and 16 and 17-year-olds out there listening. Yes, you could be the first Heisman Trophy winner at the University of Washington because of the precedent set by Michael Penix and crew here in 2023.
Was it really your idea or Mike Heward's idea for him to stitch every player and coach in his jacket? Is that what I heard after? I mean, it wasn't Republic, but was that kind of your thought you gave to the AD? He shared with Kalen. Kalen shares with Penn. Is that kind of how it went down?
Yeah, well, Dad had a bunch of tailors over the years. I mean, a lot of them weren't very good, so he'd fire one and move to the next, and certainly ended up at Mario's downtown great men's dress store, and yeah, they worked closely together and fed us that news. And I kind of told him, God, that'd be a great idea. No one's ever done it. Put all those names in there, but yeah, credit
So
Mike
cool.
Heward
Yeah, so very cool at Penix. You didn't win it, but boy, that owned the moment for sure. And I think maybe one of the lasting memories, frankly, will
for
be that
sure.
jacket. And probably not the last guy to do it. I'm gonna guess the kids, the young men that make it to New York in the years to come, somebody will follow that trend. Topic number two. I'm really curious on this one. In 2016, you were there. Coach Petersen, Washington wins the Pac-12 title, then face Alabama, got to travel to Atlanta, got to play in the Peach Bowl, got to play Nick Saban. You were around for all of it. You were doing the radio at that point as well. You're here still at the University of Washington. You're working alongside the new athletic director. You've been for every step of this way, maybe not as public and not on the air like you were in 2016, but just very curious to compare and contrast the vibe and the feeling in the building, on campus, around the team, 2016 getting there versus 2023. Any difference between the two scenarios?
Yeah, I think there just is a little bit more confidence this time around, right? I mean, Alabama, at that time and still to this day is kind of like the standard for college football. And they still kind of played well, they still do, I guess, a big boy brand of football. Now they spread the
Hmm.
ball out around a little bit more in this day and age. But yeah, I think, looking back 7 years ago, going to Atlanta, the Peach Bowl, Alabama, that defense, Nick Saban in his backyard. It's kind of like, oh, let's just hang with these guys, find a way to win in the fourth quarter. I think now there's no doubt about it. With the confidence, the way this team wins these close games, obviously beating Texas last year in the Alamo Bowl, the way you just beat Oregon as 9.5 point underdogs. I think there is so much more confidence and momentum. Yet again, going into the backyard of Texas in a lot of ways, you got to believe it's going to be a probably 70%, Texas crowd right there in Louisiana. But this does feel different. I think this team, maybe not quite as talented on defense,
Hmm.
certainly better on offense and more experienced and just riding this momentum wave of 13 and 0 and going back to last year, whatever it is, 23, 24 straight now. So yeah, this feels a lot more different and a lot more confidence.
Yeah, this team just has, and it reminds me, and you were on some national, or you were on a national title team, and obviously Super Bowl winning teams. Just, and it's hard sometimes to quantify and to qualify, but there's just that power of belief. And you see it in Kalen Deboer. You see it in his demeanor. You see it in Michael Penix and his calm, cool, collected, never rattled. You see it in Rome and the other stars. And not that 16 team wasn't, but they were humanized a little. USC beat them right in Husky Stadium that year, and you kind of were like, Pac-12 title game wasn't real pretty, against a what was that, Colorado that year? I think it was Colorado that year, right? Or Utah. It just they weren't nearly as dominant. This team just feels like it doesn't matter. If it is a shootout, we can do that. If it's a bludgeoning physical, we can do that. If it is having to go toe to toe with Oregon, we can do that. There just seems to be even more so, just kind of more arrows in the quiver. Like, hey man, whatever it takes, whatever game it's going to be versus Texas, if we got to win in the high 30s, if we got to win like we did last year in the 20s, right? Whatever it is going to take, this team just feels a little more equipped maybe than that 2016 team. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And I think it just is the experience, right? When you talk about 9 6-year seniors, okay, we didn't know anything about COVID years and guys getting the transfer portal and being able to bring in pieces. Like this is just a different era in 7 short
Hmm.
years of college football. And I think like
Would
Kalen,
they have nine? 9 6-year
I
seniors.
believe so. It's somewhere around there. I mean,
Wow.
we could do the math and talk about the Jack Westovers and Devin Colps and ZTFs and I mean Eddie Ulafocios. A lot of these guys have been there a long time and played a lot of football. And Michael Penix, don't forget him. 6 year in this offense and so yeah, you have that depth, that experience and they've done, like I was gonna say, they've done a great job filling in pieces with the transfer portal, right? Raylan goes for, like the depth at linebacker, right? We didn't have that a year ago now. So just bringing in guys, Muhammad at the corner, right? Like these little pieces here and there that have just kind of taken this team to the next level. And you just credit the whole organization of Kalen Deboer, his staff, everybody there just putting this team together like building a roster in the NFL. They've done it in a short time, and they've given themselves an opportunity to win a national championship.
We're going to get to Sark and Grubb and the offenses, and I think two of the better play designers, schemers, callers in all of college football here in just a second. But one more on this team and Kalen DeBoer in particular. You've been around a lot of coaches, been around a bunch of Hall of Fame coaches. You and I and Chris Petersen had a fun conversation on the golf course about the different influences that we've had in our lives and the different coaches we've been around. And you're like, yeah, I've been around some pretty good ones. Jimmy Johnson, Hall of Famer. Belichick Hall of Famer, some pretty Don James, pretty good ones over my tenure. Where does Kalen kind of fit amidst those different guys that you have been around, that you worked for, that you observed? Just as you've gotten to see now Kalen for 2 years, and the numbers, Damon, are just startling, right? Like 103 and 11, 8-1 versus the top team. I mean, just over again and again and again, just the level of statistical accomplishment off the charts. But as you observe him and you're around him on a daily, weekly basis, and you've been around some of the best to ever do it, compare and contrast.
Yeah, I mean, this guy, he just has a different demeanor about him, a confidence. I think that you hit the nail on the head talking about that, and I think it falls down from there to the rest of his team and his staff, right? Like nothing's too big, the moment's never too like he talks about the team being built for this. I mean, he just sets the standard, and the rest of it just flows. I've never been around a guy that like I don't know if he sleeps. I mean, he gets back to everybody.
Yeah.
He handles everything. Um, I think he might delegate better than a lot of coaches I've been around. I think he has so much trust in the staff and the people around him, and he lets them do their job, and he oversees it all. I mean, he is the quintessential CEO. And in this day and age of college football, with all of these moving parts, I don't know. It is one of the toughest jobs in America now to be a head football coach. And I think it's his demeanor, his attitude, his personality. He is the perfect model of a college football coach in 2023, and it just reflects on the way his team plays, his staff approaches everything, and it's why they're undefeated. And it starts and ends at the top with him. Special, special man.
I like the way you said that, overseer. And when I think about coming out and watching Husky practices when you were there and when Dad was coaching, and we'd come up and watch the Huskies and watch Billy and Tom Gallagher and Joe Kralik and the other Vikings that became Huskies, and we would see Don James up there as the overseer, right?
Mhm.
During practice, he was up above everybody and
In
was
the
kind of
tower.
the over, huh? He was in his tower, right?
Yeah,
He was the dog father, was in his tower overseeing it all. In some ways, isn't there some similarity there where Don had his pulse and the finger on all of his assistants, on all the scheme, on coaching the coaches first, then to coach the players? Is that maybe where the comparison between those two would be most similar?
for sure. And just that leadership, and I think obviously that it's so much different. As far as Don James wasn't like necessarily like the biggest players coach, right? You were very nervous, when you're going to cross paths with him in the hallway, right? Like, oh, here comes Coach James. What do I say? But I think there's kind of that same mutual respect. Oh, here
Mm.
comes Coach DeBoer,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it is fascinating in such a short time how the legend has been born here. I mean, let's be real. I mean, these numbers, these wins, this season, last year. I mean, I Don James, Coach Pete, Jim Owens. I mean, they've been some of the very best through these doors to ever do it. And this guy in such a short time is already surpassing those guys,
Mm,
and as you know, is a Husky legend in 2 short
yeah,
years.
yeah. Pretty remarkable. Let's talk about Sark and let's talk about Grubb. Let's talk about these two offenses. We'll get a little bit more into it in the weeks ahead as we get close to kickoff, as we preview this game as well. But Damon, I think both of these, both Grubb system along Deboer, I kind of call it the Deboer Grubb system. I mean, they've been in it forever together, and Sark system, and you were there and watching it, observed it. I think they both do such a tremendous job pre-snap.
Mhm.
The Huskies, I think, are top five in the country pre-snap movement. They love to get in the bunch. They love to shift. They love to motion. They love to get in one formation, have you show your cards, shift to a different formation, get into, the different coverage, all the things that they do to get into the tendencies and to take advantage formationally. Sark does as well. I mean, they're way up there at Texas as well as far as pre-snap movement and alignments and making it difficult on a defense. When you just look at these two systems and you look at Sark and you look at DeBoer and Grubb, where do you see any advantage? You see, any matchup that you like there, or do you just see two tremendous coordinators that can burden these defenses?
Um, well, if the Husky defense can stop the run and play the way they did against Oregon, I think advantage Huskies there as far as the offensive play callers go. I think Stark will probably lean more on the run game,
Mm-hmm.
where Ryan, with all of these weapons in the pass game, and Texas's defense ranked 96 in pass defense in the country. It's advantage Huskies. I mean, you can sit and look on the paper, now at the end of the day, it always comes down to the line of scrimmage, right? And Texas's front seven, you've seen them a couple times. They are really
Mm-hmm.
good. But
Yep.
is this Husky offensive line not one of the 10 best in America? And have
Yeah.
you is there anything that's told you in the last 2 years when we played some teams with some good fronts like Oregon, a few weeks ago that we can't handle? And is Michael Penix not going to spit it out when you bring the blitz? Is Dylan Johnson not going to step up and hit that blitzing linebacker in the middle, in the mouth? I mean, so it's such a cat and mouse game. And I think you're right. All that pre-snap stuff gives you an idea what the defense is doing. And, both those guys, Ryan and Sark, organize that chaos that the offense presents. They go, can they not get lined up? What are they doing? No, they're doing that on purpose. They want to see if the defense is in man or zone and how many guys are going to be in the box. And they
Yeah.
are. They're both really good at it. Have been doing it for years. Not easy to do. But both these offenses, yes, they're going to get their points. I think what's the over under 65 or whatever. But I think it's advantage Huskies with that secondary, that questionable secondary for the Longhorns. And
Mm-hmm.
if Jalen McMillan is healthy like he was against the Ducks, you know, good luck holding the Huskies under 30 points.
Do you think Sark could do this? You and I were around him a lot, and before the Iowa State game, it's pretty neat on the field, end of the year, and he was trying to get to a place that he had never been. Damon, this is his first year in all of his years as a head coach with double-digit wins. And
Yeah.
not only does he get double-digit wins, and they keep crossing and climbing the mountain, ultimately win the first Big 12 title for Texas since 2009, ultimately get to a playoff, ultimately everything they wanted when they hired him 3 years ago from Bama to get them SEC ready. He's built a team and equipped them and has them in this playoff. Do you think that was possible back in the days when maybe there was a little bit more of an immature Sark that needed to grow and needed to develop? Did you always think that this was possible in his coaching DNA?
Oh, that's hard to say, Brock. I mean, when we hired him, he was like 36 years old here. First time head coach, first time ever in that chair.
Mm,
And certainly did so many great things. I mean, it's hard to believe, but don't forget that 15 years ago, we were 0-12 and the worst team in America when he showed up. He got recruiting rolling. I think that 16 Husky football team was loaded with a bunch of kids that he and Johnny Nansen and crew had recruited. So he did a lot of amazing things here as a head football coach. Obviously, ran into some issues at his next stop at SC, but kudos to him. And I think America, we love people getting second chances. And I'm fired up for Sark and all that he's accomplished now as a head coach, and certainly this year. But you know, come January 1, I'm sorry, bud. I think we're showing up with the better head coach.
last thing here, last topic is we hopefully do this a bunch. And you're just killing it too, by the way. Like just like you did, as the older brother there on Ninth Street, as I said, hitting the record button. Do you remember that thing? We thought we were the next
Oh
Ron
yeah.
Crow and Carl Lambert. We really did.
Oh,
And
for
now
sure.
all these years later, we get our
On
chance to
Cajun.
finally. do it.
AM
Cajun radio.
1450 Cajun. Oh,
Alamo Bowl a season ago.
mhm.
Does it play any role into preparation, into the execution? Does that favor one side or the other? That, hey, these two basically tangled. I know there was no Bijan and Roshan, they've graduated anyway, but there was Quinn and he threw for 380 yards, and there's Worthy, and there's their O line and their D line. And the fact that the guys got to tangle against one another 12 months ago play a role in anything we see January 1?
I think it gives the Huskies a whole heck of a lot of confidence that they can do this again in their backyard, for sure. And even the Alamo Bowl was even more so their backyard.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, New Orleans is not that far from Austin, Houston, and the rest of the Longhorn Nation. And Matthew McConaughey will find his way there pretty easy, I'm sure. So I think that is a huge advantage for us for sure. So playing, yeah, I think there's all that tape, right? I mean, there's a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
same faces at Pete Kwiatkowski, and he does what he does. He's not the most exotic of defensive coordinators.
Mm-hmm.
His guys are certainly, where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there. They make you earn it. They'll play with a deep safety back there and probably won't give us as many home run shots. I don't remember as many home run balls
No.
last year in that game, but
Mm-mm.
that's okay. We've seen Michael Penix. He can throw every completions outside the numbers better than anybody in America. And there's going to be a lot of one-on-one matchups outside there. And now you got this run game that you didn't really not have when you showed up to San Antonio last December. So I think this is a more balanced Husky offense. I think this is a better Husky defense. And is Texas that much better this year? I know they got to 12 wins, but I was not impressed with the Big 12 top to bottom. I think they had a lot of close games against very average teams, TCU, Kansas State. So they're going to get some points, obviously, with their weapons and their game plan. But I'm sorry, this is advantage Huskies, and I think that game last year certainly feeds that fire.
One thing that struck me to speak to it and to close out this first Brock and Damon playoff preview podcast that we'll do a few of. One thing that a number that jumped out to me as I was looking at the month of November, the month of November that everybody remembers, and then ultimately that leads to December and the win over Oregon. That month of November, the Huskies averaged over 5 yards a rush. Right, Dylan got his legs. Dylan got healthy, started to balance out some of that offense after all of the firepower through the air in September and October. Over 5 yards a carry, which would have put them, that number is in the top 20 in the country, yards per carry. And then you throw in the country's leading passer and Pete Kwiatkowski, and that Texas defense is going to have
Good
a
luck.
whole bunch to chew on over the next couple weeks leading up to January 1.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny. You kind of go back to 2022, and it was like the longest summer of all time, right? I mean, it into November. I was hanging grapes, if you want to know, but at Husky Stadium, I mean, there was not one bad weather game in 2022 for the Dogs. There really wasn't. And as you know, playing in that stadium, playing in Pullman or Corvallis, in late November, like it gets pretty rough. And the Dogs actually had to deal with some elements this year. And I think, that their ability to run the football has certainly made them more of a play, not only being a playoff bound contender, but a national championship contender now because of that balance on that side of the football. So maybe Mother Nature kind of forced them into a little bit of it. But boy, what a difference it's made down the stretch, a difference it made in the Pac 12 championship game. And I think, really gives them a viable shot to win this whole thing.
And that dome, pretty good weather conditions, January 1. We know that.
Oh, it's going to be beautiful. Both of them.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, good times.